Welcome to the GOYA Gatherings podcast, a serene and inspiring space where the worlds of yoga and wellness converge. Every episode is a journey into the heart of yoga, offering you deep insights, uplifting stories, and practical wisdom. Our conversations are designed to inspire your journey and illuminate your path to well-being. Please remember that the views expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of GOYA Gatherings or its hosts.
Welcome to the GOYA Gatherings podcast. My name's Mark. I'm part of the leadership team here at GOYA. And today's guest on the podcast is J.Brown. J.Brown is a yoga teacher, and we're going to have a fascinating conversation covering the philosophy behind Jay's approach to yoga, the role of a breath-centered practice, and some of the deeper cultural shifts happening within modern yoga. So this will be a really interesting conversation. I'm very excited for you all to meet Jay. So let's begin. Hi, Jay.
Hey.
Hi. So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Mark, right?
Mark. Yes. Oh, yeah. My name's not there.
That's okay. I knew it was going to be you.
Jay, it's lovely to meet you.
And you, sir. And you.
Obviously you do this probably a lot more than I do. So is there anything you'd like me to know beforehand, or anything you have a question of beforehand?
No, like I said, I've been recording podcasts every week for more than 10 years. So this is
it's
very comfortable territory for me. I'm happy to go wherever you want to go in the conversation.
Okay.
I don't have any questions for you.
It's funny because I said to Michelle, because we have some guests who really love to stick to the questions because they obviously prepared and written down their answers. And I said to Michelle, I have just feeling based on the amount of podcasts that Jay has, that probably it's not the case that you need to sort of stick to the format to be more relaxed, the conversation.
No, I glanced over the questions that you sent me, which, I didn't spend much time preparing. In fact, I spent no time preparing because
Good.
That's what I do with my show. I don't know that all podcasts do that. I do think sometimes people like to have like a pre-conversation where they kind of talk a little bit about what they're going to talk about and whatnot. I have never done that. I've never wanted to do that. I've always wanted to be like we're doing right now, where we're just half jumping on and having a conversation. In my mind, it's always been like, oh, I'm just meeting someone. We're having a cup of tea. We wouldn't prepare any answers. But, podcasting can take kind of different forms and people do things differently. So I understand why people like to do that. But I'm very happy to just have it be an improvisatory space.
I love it. In other settings, it would be stressful to me to think about improv in a performance setting. But in this setting, I love it because I think conversations flow much more naturally when we do that.
I agree.
In fact, I probably will start the episode from a few moments ago because I think that's a really lovely introduction too.
I would be so happy for you to do that. And, I will say it's particularly funny for me because for many years in the podcast, I had a practice of, starting to record as we did as soon as someone came on, and we would just be chatting like you and I just were. And then at some point, someone would say, oh, are we going to start? And I would say, oh, we already started, because I never do formal. And it was my favorite moment because it showed that it was very real, unscripted conversation. But at a certain point, it became problematic because people didn't like that people were going to hear portions of a conversation that they didn't know were going to go out to the public. And I didn't want to play I wasn't trying to do a gotcha thing with anybody. I just liked the realness and the spontaneity. But now I always mention at the beginning that we're recording, and so that they know, so there's not going to be any, confusion.
We're recording. Sorry, in case I didn't.
I figured as much. Now we're in it. So we're good. Not to worry.
Jay, just in case any of our audience of GOYA don't know who you are, could you maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I kind of came into yoga in the early 90s in New York City. I had graduated from NYU with a degree in acting and directing, but became incredibly disenchanted with that as like a career pursuit. I was also, pretty messed up. My mom had passed away when I was 16, and acting school did a lot of good things for me in terms of like being able to like feel things and access emotions, because that's sort of part of the job. But it didn't do very much for me in terms of like building up a sense of self or anything. And in many regards, it left me kind of like a wreck, pretty messed up about it. And I think that yoga was sort of this place where I began to explore spirituality. I rejected the religion of my parents, and like a lot of people in the 90s in Manhattan, yoga was this sort of underground thing. It hadn't really hit the mainstream yet. I got into it because I wanted to know what inner peace was, because I felt miserable about my mom. In any case, I, practiced pretty seriously for a little while there, and then kind of caught the wave and started teaching at an early time. I taught for many years, and I was sort of the generation that I think had one foot before the internet and one foot after the internet. And I was an early adopter of a lot of these things. I was sort of very active in like the blogosphere. There was a time when people were first going online, and there was blogs and then comment threads attached to the blogs before there was Facebook comments and comment threads. And that early time for like online, blogosphere yoga was pretty kind of amazing. I met a lot of people. I had this ongoing blog I did for about 10 years, like every month I wrote something. And then at some point there was a pretty big shift where everything went on Facebook, and it sort of stopped being on people's individual blogs. And it was more about posting it onto Facebook, and social media kind of took hold more and more. At some point, those who are around will remember the algorithms got tweaked or something, and it stopped being about connecting with your old high school friends, and it became about everybody trying to sell stuff even to their friends. And the line between like friends and like clients or whatever kind of blurred, and everybody started like branding themselves, And I had a yoga center in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg, for about 10 years. And at about kind of 7 years in, the writing was on the wall that this wasn't going to last. And the rents had just gone up so much, and the neighborhood had completely changed. And when I first got into yoga, I was like in my early 20s. And then now here I was like in my early 40s, and I've got a wife and 2 kids and a yoga center that I can't afford to have anymore. And that's when I started the podcast. Like nobody was reading blogs anymore. And I started podcasting in like late 2015 because I was listening to podcasts. And so the podcast has sort of been my weekly thing since then, more than 10 years now. So I think people sort of know me from the podcast, but I have been practicing and teaching all along. I think the podcast has really been like where I've gotten all my continuing education. It was also an earlier time in podcasting where I just remember like, I don't know, reaching out to my yoga heroes and like sending them an email and them saying yes, and me being like, oh my God, now I have to talk to them, and it's been sort of like learning in public thing all these years. And there's a small group of dedicated listeners, some of which have been with me since the beginning. And that kind of brings us to here. You guys reached out.
We reached out. We did what you did in 2015.
Yeah, you started a podcast.
I mean, what fascinates me is that you were obviously part of the early yoga movement, at least in, North America as we know it, and then the early podcast movement. Because 2015 it was pretty early for a lot of like podcasts probably didn't really fully take off till a few years later. So how did you know that was the right direction to move? Like, did you have any sense of like, oh, this is going to be a success, this will work? Or did you just sort of evolve and adapt with the necessity of what life was presenting you?
I would say that it had mostly to do with where my personal yoga inquiry was taking me. Like the blog writing was a place where I was exploring ideas about yoga and asking certain questions. Like the first blog I ever wrote was called Notes from a Concerned Practitioner Teacher. And it was about how I had studied several different approaches in practice, and that I felt like I had been taught some things that ended up being injurious to me. And I had decided not to do those things anymore. And I was suggesting that maybe there were some things that were being taught in yoga classes that should be questioned. So it was always a place for me to kind of explore ideas, and the blog was very fruitful for a while. At a certain point, I felt like an 800-word blog no longer was able to kind of hold the kind of nuance or subtlety that I wanted. And blogging did what like social media has sort of done now, where it does sort of become kind of like trolling, like you realize, like if I write something really controversial or kind of provocative, I will get way more hits and reach. But like 70% of them are people who don't like me and are like mad about what I said, and there's like 30% who are like happy about it. So like you learn about how like, oh, the algorithms are kind of tweaking like for outrage. I actually just recorded a podcast with Lizzie Lassiter recently about yoga teachers using AI to create social media content and how they do that, because they know that if you stir outrage, you'll get more attention. So it gears towards a certain sarcasm, a certain trolling attitude. So that was happening in blogging too. And I became disenchanted with that. And I didn't like that. And I was listening to a podcast. I was listening to Mark Maron, actually. He was one of the early podcasters back in the day. And it was just long form, unscripted conversations. And I felt like, oh, that's what I want to do. I want something that's going to be real. It was like old time radio on the internet. And I would say the other component was me doing these intros and outros that I've done over the years, which is all about me basically, I don't know, tearing down some of the edifices. Like back in the day, there was this idea of yoga teachers and drinking green smoothies and living these kind of blissful, healthy lives where they didn't have to be stockbrokers and they could live in harmony with nature more and make a living and be hot and spiritual. It was like this whole kind of Instagramification of yoga thing that happened. And here I was had made a living for 15, 20 years at this point as a yoga teacher. And I was like in massive chronic pain. I had labral tears and, and the money situation was hard. It wasn't like this glamorous thing. So some of the early episodes, if people go back and listen to them, you'll hear me just like crying in the intro and like admitting that I have pain and stuff. And sometimes even like a transparency almost to a fault. Like I think I've matured a lot in the last 10 years. And I've found like a healthier balance for setting boundaries around how much I'm sharing on the podcast and how much I'm not sharing, or sharing in a way that I think is actually more useful to other people and not just me, purging or something. But in any case, the podcast it was really just an intuitive thing for me. Like it's a practice that I have now of seeing if I can connect with other people, seeing if I can inquire and learn more about yoga, which is sort of a profession I've claimed or whatever. And it has just become like this way for me to connect with people. People who listen to the show often have become my friends. Just like people in my own family don't listen to the show. And then people like who live on the other side of the planet listen every week for the last 10 years. And they know me better than people in my family because of that, which is kind of crazy, but also kind of beautiful.
Do you get a lot of, did you notice a lot of backlash when you began sharing a lot about because, you're sort of, you were saying like breaking down that image of this perfect yoga teacher and then coming out there and saying like, I have chronic pain or this didn't work for me, or we maybe should rethink what we're doing here. Like, did you receive a lot of backlash from the yoga community?
Oh, yes, I have received quite a bit of backlash over the years. Some of it was like just, me kind of late at night, a little bit unhinged, saying things that weren't thought through before I said them, and then people getting upset about things that I said, and me being like, "Oh, I was just late," spouting off, like just not really taking a lot of responsibility. And then I think at some point, there was one point when the podcast really took off, and it was also a time in the yoga world where there was just like a lot of controversy. So, I had Karen Rain come on and talk about being sexually assaulted by Patabi Joyce. Or brought Keno McGregor on and I called her out, and I would never do some of the things that I did then now. Like, I don't want to create any adversarial relationships between me and guests. I want people to feel good about coming on the show. I'm not trying to call anybody out anymore. I'm not trying to create division and disharmony anymore, even if it means that more people would listen to the podcast, which they would, which is the sick thing. Yeah. That I would get more listeners and have more reach if I did things that pissed people off or kind of created more adversity, which I'm not interested in doing anymore. So, over the years, I have gotten backlash for certain things that I've said. And then there were a couple times where people I brought on upset people, and they didn't like that I was sort of quote unquote platforming someone. I've learned a lot. I've had kind of 2 cancellation campaigns against me over the years. And I do have a very strict policy now. I don't delete episodes. I don't, my philosophy is we do more episodes. If you want to come on and you want to talk about what was wrong with something that got said on the show, let's do that. But I'm not going to delete previous conversations. Even if I say things that I don't agree with now, that's okay. I want it to live out there for people to see the growth. That's the whole idea. Sort of like learning in public has always been part of it.
It's a huge thing as a yoga teacher too, to be that vulnerable and to be willing to put out there your evolution and growth. And, there's sometimes like students come to our yoga classes and they have no idea the journey that we've been on to get to where we are, where we feel comfortable guiding people through a yoga practice, but letting people in to see that growth and evolution is huge. And I don't think that there's too many people out there doing that, because it is more common, probably delete, this never happened, ciao.
Well, I think that's true to some degree, particularly like in a social media realm. But I think in like individual teachers' lives and practices, I think that one of the things I've observed in terms of sort of modern yoga teachers who are very sincere about inquiring into yoga is that many of us, not just me, have in their own ways, not necessarily from having a podcast where they like spout off about everything, but there's a different kind of transparency around a teacher's process than some of the teachers we had, because there's been so many problems with gurus falling from grace or people getting put on pedestals in certain ways that are then betrayed, that one of the ways that someone avoids those kinds of pitfalls is by being very transparent and inviting students to hold them to what they say, to hold them to account. So being kind of radically transparent has been a way for me to try to avoid falling into some of the traps that I observed teachers who came before me falling into.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. There was something, you said something before that I can't seem to, there's like something in my mind I can't seem to shake. Where you talked about in your earlier episodes of it was the blog that you did where you talked about maybe things that we were doing in yoga at the time that maybe we shouldn't be doing. I'd love to know more about maybe what that was, or what you see now or have seen over the years, this kind of like evolution of yoga. Has it gone in a way that you see as a positive change for the practice of yoga generally as it's practiced in certain areas of the world? Or are we still doing things that maybe aren't ideal?
Well, I would be hesitant to suggest that I know or can speak in generalized terms about these things. But I would say I've observed, and, my whole shtick, my gentle is the new advanced motto that I've used over the years. That started out as a blog post in, I believe, 2013 by that title, Gentle is the New Advanced. Because as I mentioned to you, I ended up having like chronic pain issues, partially, I think, because I have like a lot of hypermobility, as a lot of people who are proficient in yoga poses sometimes do. And just the way that I was practicing, I think, was aggravating that. Whether or not it caught, I don't know, there's a debate. I don't think poses are inherently injurious so much as the way we go about them that would be injurious or not, or, certain approaches in practice. There's kind of like one right way to do it. At least there used to be more of that. I think it's changed some over the years, even in the stricter schools. But there used to be a much more stricter line of there being one right way to do it. And I don't know that that idea was very healthy. So for myself, at a certain point, I made this big shift away from being able to like accomplish asana. Because at a certain point, what defined you as an advanced practitioner was your ability to execute the forms. And in some schools, it's still kind of the case. Like if you can do second series, then you get to move to third series or whatever. Like depending on the teacher, I know I've had people come on the show to talk about this. But what I would say is that at a certain point in terms of general public's idea about yoga practice and what advanced yoga meant, like if you went to the yoga center and it said level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, what made level 4, and level 1 was what you can or can't do physically. So I was someone who was able to do level 4 poses and was kind of being lifted up as an advanced practitioner because I could do handstand presses and really deep back bends where I put my feet on my head. But at a certain point, I was able to do all of that, but I still had a lot of pain and was very disillusioned inside myself over my mom, which is why I got involved in yoga in the first place. And I think that kind of happened in the yoga world more generally, where it's much easier to sell handstand workshops than it is a subtle inquiry into the nature of your existence and death. So some of the deeper questions that yoga concerns itself with, the mystical questions and questioning of the nature of our reality or what ourselves are, those questions got kind of pushed a little bit away. We went from like, kind of chanting in every class to talking about polyvagal theory and functional movement patterns. Like there was a real movement as yoga became more commercial and more mainstreamed to find different lenses to look at it through. The idea was to bring more people in, like the more people doing yoga, the better. So science lenses and other ways of looking at yoga, particularly a fitness lens, which is really what kind of took hold of the yoga world. Still to this day, to some degree, it's still associated with strength and flexibility. Now, someone like myself, ironically, my yoga practice is all about attention, my observed experience, noticing my patterns. And then I do other things for strengthening now, like goblet squats or push-ups or other things that I almost do not as an integrated part of my hatha yoga practice, but as like a separate thing. So at a certain point, I became disinterested in being able to do the forms. And I wanted to concern myself with these deeper questions. And, so gentle practice, like if you take the harder physicality off the table, like if it's no longer about what poses you can do or what poses you can't do or how perfectly you do them, there's all this room for it to be about other things. And that is really where, the Desikachar teachings were a huge inspiration for me. It's rooted in an idea of personal practice that one does. And that personal practice has to do with developing sustained attention and clear lenses of perception. And they don't emphasize like intricate sequences. That's all simple practices. And so that's what I started doing by myself. And that really shifted everything for me. And some huge, deep epiphanous, breakthroughs inside myself, really. And then I set about trying to see if I could bring those principles of practice, like personal, breath-centered practice inspired by Desikachar, into like group vinyasa yoga classes, because I was living in New York City. So I came up with ways to try to bring those principles into what I was doing. And that's what Gentle is the New Advanced became. It was like, can I have a class that looks enough like a New York yoga class that people won't just like write me off in the first 2 minutes, but is still true to these principles of practice that are what are actually working for me, and is pointing people in the direction of the like deeper inquiry that I think yoga is really most valuable for.
Wow. I mean, I know you started answering this question by saying, obviously you can't speak for everybody, but it's just an interesting story to hear because it very much mirrors my own experience in yoga. How, beginning with just focused goal poses, crazy poses, and then injuring myself, and then realizing that strength is something I need to have apart from my yoga, like strength training, and that my yoga practice is much more gentle. And I know quite a few people who've had a similar experience where their yoga practice has evolved. So it is something that I think a fair number of yoga teachers must experience, because we're two people here talking about having a similar movement through yoga. Have you found that, like, what's the reaction and response of your students been to these types of classes that are like Gentle is the New Advanced?
Well, I made the transition quite a long while back, back in, I think, 2002 or 2003 is when I first really decided I'm not doing that other type of practice anymore, and I'm going to teach this other way. And I remember when I first did that, it was a very different time in the yoga world. There was a lot of independently owned centers. So I was already a pretty popular like power vinyasa teacher. And then I just kind of showed up and started doing this really simple practice. And, people complained to the yoga center owner about it. And they're like, did you know that Jay's doing this simple class? He's doing the same thing every time now. And they were like, I was breaking all of these like power vinyasa rules. And, at that time was real different. The owner of the center called me in and we had a conversation, and I explained to her, I said, oh, I'm really inspired by this teacher, TKV Desikachar, and I'm employing these principles of practice. And she came to class and she was interested and was supportive. I don't think nowadays, if you get, complaints, they're going to want you to be more like the power class that has more attendance, because I do think in those early years, I was able to kind of mark a niche for myself, where I was like I was slow flow before they called it slow flow. I remember I had the yoga center for 10 years. And then after the yoga center, I moved to Pennsylvania and I started teaching at some centers, and they didn't know what to call my class, but it was like slow flow, mindful flow, it was sort of like moving meditation, like it was all, because it was just slower, simpler vinyasa, where you're emphasizing breath as a central feature more. So it's not that it's slow, it's that you're making your breath longer and smoother, and then you're syncing it to that. So that's what makes it slow. It doesn't have to be slow necessarily, but in any case, I think for myself, I made that transition a long while back. And in the early days, it really felt like it was just, there was a wave of power yoga that we were like pushing up against. I do think that changed at a certain point, accessible yoga and like all these different movements within the yoga world that have happened over the last 2 decades. The democratization of yoga institutions, even, I think really did change that. I think there's a lot more discernment and scrutiny around, what happens in yoga classes. I mean, some people might disagree, but generally speaking, a lot of teachers like myself, we all changed our languaging. We all stopped telling people what to do and started inviting people to try things. There was all kinds of stuff that has happened, I think is just a natural evolution of teachers wanting to have integrity and be authentic and not be harmful and be helpful that have happened. So I think there is some move towards a gentler approach in yoga, like you and I experienced. However, those teachers are all struggling. I mean, everybody's struggling right now financially, but those teachers struggle even more because the hot yoga classes right now are the ones that are really well attended. They provide a more immediate gratification. I'm not trying to make a value judgment on it or anything, but those classes are going to do better right now, more so than a class that it's kind of requiring you to participate in a different, it has a different sort of challenge to it that often involves like intimacy and other things that people are sometimes avoiding, you know?
So have you, so you've obviously like seen that there are some people out there who are really trying to focus on this sort of gentle as advanced type way of teaching, or more invitational way of teaching. Do you see a future where that replaces the more sort of like forceful, hot power?
No, I don't.
No.
I don't see it replacing it. I mean, I think that there is going to always be a certain grassroots population of people who, for whatever reason, sometimes unbeknownst to them, they have an impulse towards yoga practice. And for many of us, it is a vehicle for finding direction and connection and all kinds of things that make our lives feel more fulfilled. So I think that there is always that natural impulse. And some of it is maybe even life stages, you know, like different stages of life. Practice takes on different roles. They do teach about that in the Desikachar tradition. So some of it might be that. We just might be getting older, you know, in fairness. But I will say that honestly, I see it actually going more underground. Like almost 2 years ago, I opened this yoga center that I'm sitting in now, but this is the last week I have it. I'm closing it at the end of the week and I'll be going back to my home. See, you made a sad face. See, but here's the thing. I opened this almost 2 years ago because at that point in time, was only teaching online for like a while. Like before the pandemic, it was probably like 60% in person, 40% online. I was an early adopter of online yoga, so well before the pandemic. But then during the pandemic, of course, it went to a complete 100% online. And then I did my best to like bring back my in-person events and do some stuff, but it only got to maybe 5 or 10%. You know, travel's real rough now. So at a certain point, I was like sitting in a room by myself with a laptop and I pulled back and saw myself as like a Black Mirror episode. And I kind of freaked out a little bit. And that's when I got it in my head to open up this space. And what I did is I got a storefront space in my neighborhood that I can walk to 7 minutes away. And I just like put a sign out front. I have a cigar box with cash in it and then a QR code for Venmo or credit card. No registration system, no mind body software, a paper sign-in sheet. And, you know, it worked to some degree. I brought in about half the income it needed to meet its overhead. And I have online stuff that I did, so it was able to fund that. And I reaffirmed all the reasons why I love yoga. Again, you know, like not that I wasn't getting good yoga online, because I do have real yoga with people online too, but there was something about people I'd never met before just deciding to show up to a yoga center. And just like it started for me in the early 90s, you know, and, you know, the majority, I would say at least 60% of the people who've been coming are all older women who are essentially the same age that my mom would be if she was still alive. And I didn't mention this to you. That's crazy. When I decided to make the shift into a gentle practice, part of the motivation was I want to be able to teach a class that my mom could come to. And so this last 2 years has felt essentially like just like me teaching yoga to my mom like the whole time. And this morning, this woman, Sharon, came. So in any case, there has been a contraction online, and I can't justify paying for the space anymore. But the reality of it is I haven't really had more than 4 people in class, and I can fit 4 people in my living room down the street. So I'm going to basically go to having like a home studio. So in the early days, it was all living rooms in church basements. Then we had storefronts like I have now. Then we created multi-room spa environments. And so I've just been kind of going back. I had this place and now I'm going to go back to the living room. But it is about kind of being able to stay true to what values and beliefs I'm holding and what I feel like my yoga teaching is about. And I will say this too, I am also to the place where if I can't make a living teaching this approach, I will just find other ways to make money because I'm not interested, even though I could, like I certainly know how to teach other approaches. I'm studied in other approaches, but at this point in my life at 53, I'm not going to do that. I can't do that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. And it's so fascinating too, because what you've demonstrated over the course of the conversation thus far is just this ability to evolve and pivot that I think is really difficult for a lot of us. I know for myself personally, like that ability to just sort of to see something. I guess that's also what the yoga practice gives us, is that ability to really see something for what it is, to see it sort of from a little bit of a distance, and to be able to then make mindful, smart, compassionate decisions based on the information that we're getting. I don't know a lot of people who who are able to demonstrate that time and time again. So it's actually very inspiring. I mean, I was obviously initially sad when you said closing the studio, but then when you told us a little bit more about why and what it will be, it's like, oh no, it's really cool to see someone who's able to take something that a lot of people could have just only see the negative, and then to make that a positive shift for yourself and then for the people who find you, I think is huge. It's also interesting too that things come back full circle. You know, it started in church basements and homes, and then here we are again where and I mean, I taught in those studios that had the multi-spa rooms. They're no longer there. You know,
not
like
the same way they are. I mean, but there is a hot center down the way downtown. Like, so again, there's still yoga happening out there. And I know, again, people like that approach, and I wouldn't want to take it away from anybody. But I think that practice environments that are geared towards other kinds of aspects, the contemplative aspects, as we sometimes call them, those are harder to make work on a kind of money business level. And I think in the past, I was somebody who really, I've always had a vested interest in there being a way for a yoga teacher to make a living as a yoga teacher, and I've always kind of advocated for that, because the fact that I've been able to focus as single pointedly as I have in study, I think benefits me and the people who practice with me. At the same time, I do think that so much of being a yoga teacher has become about marketing, like being able to make and market products. And I've certainly done that. And I think that there's a way to do it that feels in line with your values, where you don't feel like you're selling yourself in a way that you're not comfortable with. But still, so much of like being able to like make a living or have it be like a profession, because that's what we mean by that. Like, I guess you can be professional and not be making money, but the idea that it's a career, I guess, is the way to say it, that there's a career path for yoga teachers. And if you get well trained and you do and you have a social media and all the things that you're supposed to do, maybe that you will have a career path towards yoga. And I'm just not trying to perpetuate any myths about that anymore, because I don't, as someone who has whatever, quote unquote, had a career at age 53, I'm, like you say, looking at it soberly. I know that it's harder now to make a living as a yoga teacher than it ever has before in all the years that I've done it. I know that I've had business partners who know more about marketing than me. I've been in those strategy meetings. I kind of know enough to know what people are doing now in order to make things work more online. And I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not going to do it anymore. So that's maybe me going through like a midlife crisis about it. I don't know, but I think for myself personally, and I don't know that this is true for other people at different life stages, I've done everything I really wanted to do as a yoga teacher. I don't have any aspirations. And I think that the celebrity of yoga is kind of done. That doesn't really exist anymore like it used to. And that's probably a good thing in some ways. But for myself, I'm kind of sticking to my guns, so to speak. And, right now things are working okay and we're going to see how they go. But to the point that you made earlier, that idea of being able to observe yourself and have awareness about your experience. And like I said, identify patterns. And like you said, make choices about how you wish to respond. So you're not in reaction to everything that's happening. I mean, that is basically what I've learned from yoga practice. So it seems to me that that would want to be expressed in how we're going to go about ourselves as yoga teachers.
What would your advice be then to someone who is just beginning their yoga career? They've just, they're starting to really consider this as being something they want to do full time.
Mm.
Like what would you say to that person?
I really don't know. Frankly, I think it would have to be depending on who that person was. And I'd have to know something about who that person was and what their situation was and why they want to teach yoga and if they're currently paying their rent and how so. Like, I don't think that I can give a generalized answer to anybody who's new trying out yoga. I think that I don't think anybody should have an expectation that they're going to be able to make a living teaching yoga right now. I just don't. I know that's kind of like a cynical thing to say. I think my advice would be to really develop your practice and to teach in the way that makes sense given your circumstances, often with immediate friends and family to start. So, during the pandemic, I kind of mentored some people on some of these ideas where people learned, oh, actually, I only need like a Zoom account and an email list to have my own online yoga school. And so, I know people who had like an email list of like 30 people, but like 12 of them came every week and they did real well, better than they were doing when they were getting $30 per class at the center beforehand, and people kind of developing their own individual sanghas. And then, yes, it might make sense for someone to kind of expand what they're doing in certain ways, or often opportunities get presented to them. I've seen that happen for people. I don't mean to suggest that there isn't still places for people to teach yoga. I guess I'm a little bit skeptical, and I know like you're talking to me as representative of like a yoga teacher trade organization. So I'm conscious of that, that I so appreciate that we're having this kind of conversation in that kind of context, because I do think a lot of times the trade organizations are kind of perpetuating this myth of credentialing, where we're creating more credentials as though that's going to grow the yoga world. And at a certain point, I don't always trust what we've been doing when it comes to, trade organizations for yoga. So I might have lost a little track of where we started in that question there, but maybe you got something from it.
Definitely. I mean, I think first of all, yes, you're right. Like, it's not possible without knowing more. Like, the individuality of like a person's path is, I think, foremost, and I think it's responsible to not give general advice, especially now where there's so many different avenues that a person could take. So I loved your answer because it was a very real answer, which
And
are hard to come
I'm sorry
by.
to interrupt you, but I have in my back of my head, like all those like things that show up on my reels of like, ooh, I can help you get your 6-figure yoga career.
Yeah,
And I feel myself wanting to kind of will push back on that,
totally. No, I mean, and I mean, you're an example of a person who's needed to pivot and change and evolve. And I think that that's true for all yoga teachers. If they want to continue teaching and sharing yoga, that at some point we have to pivot and evolve and do something different or do something new or do something that maybe seems like we might have fear around. So I think that the smart answer is what you gave.
Well, let me add a little something to what you said about needing to do something new or different, because sometimes the thing that's new and different is not new. And I say that because a lot of times when I hear people talking about evolving, and it's often about using technology and AI tools and how we're going to do that and how we have to embrace that. And I'm going the complete other way. I'm suggesting that the revolutionary thing for yoga teachers to do is to find ways to keep what they're doing analog. I don't mean that means not doing Zoom meetings, still doing Zoom meetings, but I don't know, there's a way of doing things in terms of even how you're generating, like when people are now using AI language models to generate material, I think it's affecting what gets put out, as I kind of referenced earlier. I just did this podcast on, so it's fresh in my mind. And I think for myself, it's going back a little bit to the earlier times when we just were sort of showing up and teaching yoga classes, and I guess move kind of like an anti-marketing, where it's more about notifications rather than flashy catcha memes,
Well, your studio setup is an example of that, because when you outlined this, what I imagine probably was, or when I began taking yoga in a church basement, it was a sign-in sheet. There was no software to do any of that. Like it really, but the experience itself, nothing, like it didn't take away from the experience as a student. Like I went in, I signed a sheet, I put my name down, I paid, and then I took the class. Like I think you just gave us an example of a very analog way. Obviously, QR codes and things like that are ways that we need to use those things to get payment, but there's a way to do it that it's very simple and very not bare bones, but very pared down to be successful, because you don't have the overhead of these huge software platforms that you have to think that you may need to have in order to be able to run yoga out of your basement at home.
Well, in fairness, I will say that I did learn that people no longer engage with like coming to yoga classes in the same way as they did back in an earlier time in my life. For instance, when I started this place, I made what I always did back in the day was just like a schedule card. Like we have an ongoing weekly schedule. So it just said Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then it had the times for each day of the week. But it wasn't like a Google Calendar on your phone where you can scroll and see April 2nd, 3rd. It was just a week. People didn't understand how to read it. I literally had to then use Google Calendar so people could, and I even at some point created a way for people to register online. I did it as kind of a hack. I didn't use any softwares. I just used like a Stripe payment link. It's a longer conversation. People want to know. You can definitely DIY these things if you kind of understand the apps and the tech behind them. But I did that because I had one person who's told me that she almost didn't come because there was no online registration. So she wasn't confident that there was going to actually be a class. So like some people felt like if there wasn't online registration, their class wasn't going to happen. So I don't know. So I made some changes to try to accommodate the way that people engage with technology and register for classes. And again, most of the people who've been coming are kind of older generations. I am right next to a college, and I have had some college kids come over the last, year and a half, but I bring it up because I do think that people they don't engage with yoga classes in quite the same way. It's a smaller population of people that are kind of game for it, what we're talking about, which again it's a numbers thing. Like you said, if you have less overhead, you don't need more numbers. I mean, even this place, I had it figured out, the room holds 8 to 10. I only needed 4 or 5 to be making a bit of profit. So I kind of had it. I didn't need that many people to make it work, is my point. But I still didn't get enough people because it is also, I guess, it's challenging people to something that people. There's a thing in marketing where you're supposed to figure out what people, like a problem that you're solving for people, right? Or the need that you're going to meet. But the need that we're meeting in the sort of yoga practice we're talking about is something that people don't always readily admit that they need. And so, it's fine if we're not trying to grow yoga empires and we find a way to make a living one way or another. But if we're trying to grow a business, it becomes a dilemma. And I'm not trying, as I said, I'm not trying to grow a business anymore. So, yeah.
Before we kind of wrap up, because there's so many avenues we could go down, but I don't want to obviously take all of your
Yes, I am on a little bit of a tight schedule, so we do sort of have to wrap up, I'm afraid.
So I just love to know what your personal practice looks like. Now, you sort of gave us a little bit of that at the beginning, but sort of what yoga is for you now in your life, at this stage in your life.
Well, what yoga is in my life has been sort of a foundation of me coming to know myself and finding direction and purpose and meaning on in a broader sense. I have started to feel like yoga is more about a means by which someone finds direction than a direction unto itself. But that's a much longer conversation. In terms of my personal practice, because you started there, I would say in terms of my physical practice, I do a little bit of breathing and moving in the Desikachar style, inhale, arms up, exhale, arms down. But a lot of times these days, I have a 16-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old daughter. And so a lot of my personal practice is supported shavasana. Frankly, I do a lot of supported shavasana and a lot of walking in the woods. Those are places where I feel I'm engaging myself in my personal practice. And then I think there's a lot I do just in the context of my teaching, where in order to show up to facilitate practice for other people in the approach that I'm offering them, I have to show up in that same way. I have to do all the same things to teach one of my classes that I do in a personal practice. So I do come away from teaching classes feeling better rather than depleted most of the time. That only changes when I've just got too much on me and I'm not able to do all the things I need to do to be where I need to be. But generally speaking, I've gotten to a place in my teaching where I get what I need from the teaching as well. And that's why I think it's been able to sustain, if to your earlier question about advice for younger teachers, it would be developing a practice that can change with you and letting the teaching that you do be rooted in that. If you can teach from that place, it does mean that your teaching might have to change too, because your teaching will mirror your practice. But if that's the case, then it becomes an ongoing benefit to you to keep teaching, as opposed to something that starts to feel like it's depleting you.
That's great advice. I like that you managed to wrap that in there too.
I tried because I thought I never really answered that. I never really gave anybody advice, but hopefully that's helpful.
It's super helpful. And it's also just helpful, I think, for people to hear about how other teachers and practitioners experience yoga and how yoga is sort of intertwined into the different parts of their life. So thank you for sharing that. It's really helpful. And thank you for being here today, sitting down with us, talking with us. This was such a fun, flowy conversation that I loved having with you. And I think it'll be wonderful for the GOYA community too, to hear from you and to hear your story, because I think it's very inspiring, and I feel inspired, and I also feel heard and seen. So thank you for that.
Well, you're very, very welcome. And let me just say, I know that this podcast is new for GOYA. I don't know if you're new to podcasting, but I would want to compliment you as someone who has been podcasting for a very long time. I have to say you did a fantastic job, my friend. And just that, I feel like you brought things out of me that I haven't spoken about before on other podcasts. And you were very much like in the moment with me. I didn't see you planning what you were going to say next or any of that. Like, you were really present with me. And that's what I think is most exciting about podcasting. So kudos to you, my friend. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. I've chills and tears in my eyes because I've not received that compliment before, and I'm really, really grateful. Thank you.
Great job, man. Really fun stuff.